Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Jim Boomer. Hi, Jim. Thanks for being on this episode of the podcast.
Hi, John. Happy to be here.
Most of you know Jim, but Jim is our fearless leader, our CEO. And we have a great topic for you today. And the topic is why operational leaders should be a part of your firm's leadership team. Now, Jim, I know you've been working with a lot of firms and their operational leaders, this year. But before I kind of dive into the conversation about some of the details around this, when we say operational leaders, what do we mean? Who's included in that?
It's a good question to start us off. We want to make sure we're all starting from the same point. So when we talk about operational leaders, we're talking regardless of title, whether it's chief marketing officer or your director of marketing or whatever you call the person who is leading the operational role. So that would include marketing, that would include technology, it would include HR, it would include your COO or your director of operations. And, in some firms, some of those people may be partners, they may be CPAs, but in a lot of other firms, they're not. And so that's really what leads us to today's topic.
Yes, that's a great kind of setup and definition. So, historically in our profession, if we kind of think back, operational leaders kind of across the board haven't necessarily kind of always been at the C-suite or always at that true leadership team level, right? And there's lots of reasons for that, maybe why that's been the case. But as you think about today, Jim, as you work with firms and as you think about the future of these firms and our profession, why is it critical? Why is it important for firms to really invite their operational leaders to the leadership table?
Well, I think the big thing is just, diversity of thought and perspective is the one big one. And, I'm speaking as a CPA that one of the biggest myths in our profession is that you have to have a CPA to understand how to run and lead a CPA firm. Now, granted, I'll give weight to in some states, there's ownership restrictions and you have to be a CPA, but to lead and make management and leadership decisions doesn't require a CPA. And so, the benefit of it is you become a more, again, as I started with, diverse thinking, diverse perspective leadership team, but also in the area of innovation, thinking of new ideas, identifying new technologies or new processes and ways of doing things. When you have that diversity of thought, the opportunity becomes much bigger when you have a more diverse mind share there. I think the other element of this is, especially when we talk about innovation, is that those operational leaders are in positions where they're closest to what's happening internally in the firm. They see what's going on and they can really collaborate together to sort of connect the dots. So it's not siloed thinking of, here are some great things we could do in the space of technology. Here are some things we could do in terms of our talent strategy. But when you're all in the same room talking together, you start to figure out how they're interrelated and how they can work together and complement each other and accelerate progress, and actually make that progress exponential in many cases.
Right. Yeah. And, you and I work a lot with various operational leaders. I know you work a lot with CIOs. I work a lot with CMOs, and you and I co-facilitate a circle for operation leaders. And what's interesting is when they are at the leadership table and, together, and there are those conversations taking place as you're talking about, and they see firsthand how they need to be collaborating with one another as well. So if we kind of keep them siloed or separate, out of these conversations and not all on the leadership table, and I know there's some things to that we can get into about how to evolve your leadership team. But when they're at the table, they start to connect the dots themselves with kind of how they can best be collaborating with one another. So, I mentioned that term evolution, Jim. So if you think about a typical leadership team today in most firms, it probably doesn't have as many operational leaders as you're talking about here. But as you kind of clearly defined into the future, probably what needs to be true for these firms, speak to us a little bit about some solutions or recommendations you have for firms so they can evolve their leadership teams in this way.
Right. Well, as always happens in these discussions, John, as you're asking me the next question, I remember an important point that I left out. So I'm going to go back to the importance per piece first, and then I'll talk about how to evolve that leadership team. So the last point I didn't make, in some ways we talked around it, but you and I have done a topic just on alignment and making sure your firm is aligned. And that is the other huge value, is from a strategic perspective, when you get all those minds working together, as I said before, and collaborating, and their own strategic plans roll up into the overall firm strategic plan, or they're driven from that plan. And so that alignment is another huge value piece that you have to make sure you're taking into account as you do this. So how do you do it? I mean, there's no magic on off change the formation button, but there is. I mean, you have to first start with your mindset. And so if you're stuck in that old school that you have to be a CPA to have decision making authority and to have the position of being on whether you call it the leadership team or the exec committee or whatever it is, you have to get beyond that and recognize that just because there's 3 letters after a name doesn't determine the value that they bring. So first start with your mindset. I think the second is take some action, like get moving on it. So when you're having strategy meetings, invite those operational leaders in to participate in those. And if you need baby steps, maybe it's just a portion of that meeting. I think too often, I've kind of been framing it as if they're completely excluded, and that's usually not the case. But they're sort of a resource that the firm leaders go to for information, or they'll ask an opinion, but then they are the messenger to take it back. I think it really it helps to promote those individuals and what they bring to the table when they're the ones that are able to present the ideas and bring it in. So I would say action would be number 2. Number 3, and you mentioned the circles that we facilitate, and this isn't just the promotion of the circles. It's really because we hear it time and time again, the value of getting outside of your own 4 walls and connecting with your peers and building strong relationships. That would be number 3, is invest in those people to not only develop their skills in their core job, but in their overall leadership, communication, and strategic thinking that will allow them to better connect those dots that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, there's something really powerful about, and I'll just choose an operational leadership area. There's something really powerful of, let's say, a CIO sitting at the table with a group of other CIOs and having those conversations and hearing how that operational leader over there is maybe gaining progress or momentum in a certain area in their firm, or maybe where they're struggling, or where they're looking to grow in their firm. And that there's a lot of growth that happens for operational leaders in that context, in that setting. And I love your idea too about getting the operational leaders involved in those meetings, even if it's just for a portion of it. Because one thing that does too is it really helps show that operational leader maybe what's expected or what you would like out of them or what you would like to see them grow into, right? Because if you have to prepare for an agenda item for the leadership team and you're a CMO, right, you're going to look to kind of step up your game and bring some value there, right? And that just benefits everyone. So I love that tip as well. So there's some firms that are doing this really well that you and I get to work with, Jim. So as you see firms that have done this already, they have more operational leaders at that true leadership level. What are some of the benefits or some of the results you've seen come out of that?
Yeah, so I think we've mentioned several of them already just in our discussion, but I would say, as I said earlier, alignment, just in terms of your firm strategy, and the operational strategies that should flow out of that. So alignment's number one. I think number two is acceleration again, which you're able to innovate quicker. You're able to better manage change and not just manage change, but lead change throughout your organization as you evolve. I think number three would be that all of these operational levels, you'll see them up their game. So when you invest in them, you develop them, and you include them in leadership discussions and strategy settings or sessions, they step up their game and they start to become, as an individual piece in the whole puzzle, more valuable overall. But then together, even as I use the word exponential value. You also talked about growth, but growth from a professional development. But I think growth would be the last one I would say, and the potential for exponential growth. Because when you are innovating and focused on continuous improvement from an internal focus, that naturally goes outside to your client base. And if you're treating your client base well, that means that they're going to come back to you for more and more. They're going to tell their friends. And so you have a huge opportunity that to see tremendous growth for your firm as well.
Yeah. And it's so interesting you mentioned about doing this internally and how it kind of seeps out into your clients. I was just talking with a firm the other day who is now being asked by their clients to help them build their leadership teams and things of that sort. So that kind of tees up my next question. I know you do a lot of reading, Jim, not just within the profession, but things going on outside the profession as well. Do you see this topic in terms of various operational leaders really rising to the top within an organization to lead happening outside the profession? What are you seeing there?
Well, in all honesty, I think this is a really a challenge and a mindset that is not just specific to the CPA profession, but it's also prevalent in other professional services areas. So you think about legal and partners having to be lawyers, and we don't work in that space, but I'm pretty sure it's the same sort of hang up in terms of mentality. But if you look at like the Fortune 500 on the large size, and you look at startups who are just beginning, and when they're building out their executive team, they're not saying, who should we bring in to lead our marketing efforts? Well, we should bring a CPA in. Who should we bring in to lead our technology? Oh, we should also bring a CPA in. So point being, most organizations have that diversity that I talked about earlier and aren't just saying, we need all CPAs, we need all lawyers, we need all fill in the blank. to round out our leadership team, because they recognize that that diversity of thought and perspective has such tremendous value.
Nope, that's so true. And I love your example there. So for those listening to this podcast right now, they may be thinking, yep, this is something we need to start to do in our organization, or maybe we're already doing this somewhat, but we see some new opportunities now from this conversation that we should probably start to move forward. What's the next step someone should take as they kind of hang up on this podcast, or kind of, stop listening to this at the end of the episode? What's the next step they should take?
Well, I think it's just take the first step forward. Like, think about when whether it's your next leadership team meeting, or if you have a strategic planning session planned, then go ahead and invite those people in. Think about those meetings where you go to those operational leaders and ask for reports and information to prep for your meeting. Why not invite them to come in? And I think so. Take a step is the first thing. The second, we've mentioned the circles and that peer community, whether it's our circles or it's another group of their peers. So invest in that opportunity for them, because that'll fast track their progress. But also think about how you can invest in just their overall professional development. And the return on doing that is, because we've seen it with firms time and time again, is when firms invest in their operational leaders, they see real results, and it pays for itself in no time. So, those are a couple steps that I would recommend that firms take after they finish listening to us today.
Awesome, Jim. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. That's all the time we have. So thank you for a great conversation and for being on this episode. For those listening, if you like this topic or these types of topics, please subscribe. We release new episodes every Tuesday, and knock on wood, we have not missed a Tuesday yet. So we release those Tuesday morning. Please subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, John.